Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Sylvain, welcome to the Shoot Room.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
So my name is Sylvain. I am French originally. You might not hear from my accent in the next few minutes. I haven't lived in France in a long while. I spent the last 15 years in between the UK and the US. I am a consultant and nature tech entrepreneur. And I am now the CEO and co-founder of a mighty little company called Mozaic Earth.
Take us through your career contents page, your story. Where did you start out? What are those big chapters that get us to where we are today?
So it's been like a really interesting evolution over the last 15 years. I started my career as a consultant in the oil and gas industry. Would you believe it? And I am now a nature tech entrepreneur. And when I look back at that period, I think there's a bit of logic in the madness. When I started as a consultant, a lot of my focus was on working with big energy companies and helping them optimize the way they were operating very large, high-value distributed assets. And in particular, that was right around the time where you had like a lot of this industry going through their digital transformation. And so what I specialized in is actually helping them leverage and use data better to do a little bit more with less. And what that meant often is helping engineers, instead of going to all of those sites and seeing the engines and seeing the machineries and how it works and trying to do like some diagnostics, and trying to actually like do all of this decision making based on data that was collected on site. And so pairing with that, I spent a lot of time working as well and traveling onto all of these different assets and sites, working with field operators to train them on doing more and participating in monitoring activities, collecting data on behalf of the engineers that were like more like located centrally, and learning how to care about those assets in a different ways, in a more data-driven.
Were the operators on the ground open to being more data-informed and working in that way, or was it a battle to get them to change their ways of working?
There's always like a change management component to it, but you'd be surprised on how those people care about the work they do. And I draw now like a lot of parallels with what we're focusing on in a more like natural capital space. Like those are farmers taking care of natural assets, field staff, asset managers, and they've got like a context knowledge that is irreplaceable. And it was just about trying to accompany them on the change curve to think a little bit about their day-to-day work in different ways, and teaching them to become a little bit more digital, capture data that is not like sitting just in the head, but can now like a knowledge that can be shared across the entire network, and that then engineers can use to make better decisions, faster decisions about how those assets are being managed. And as we were doing like more of this work, obviously the next question that we were like solving for is, now that you're collecting more data, how do you make decisions differently? Operations manager, even like rolling up to the C-suite. And that was right around the time where there was also like some of the sustainability topic that were creeping out. And that was an opportunity for us to, and for me to help them think about, okay, how do you start embedding more sustainability data into your decision making? How do you bring into the control rooms, into the boardrooms, emissions data alongside operational data, so that you can better understand the trade-offs and make better decisions.
When you were working in that industry, what was the relationship with the topic of climate change like? Was it discussed? Was it challenged? Did it exist at all? How did that work?
Yeah, it did exist. I did a lot of work. Obviously, like there is like a like in all industries, like change takes time, but we were doing a lot of work in helping those companies think about their methane emissions, for example, as obviously an impact on climate change, but also an impact on their bottom line. It's an inefficiency in the system that they could try to solve for. And I find it really interesting now to draw some of those parallels as well with the biodiversity loss and the biodiversity topics, because I think there's an opportunity maybe to more and more start reframing the nature topic as a risk topic for those companies. There's maybe more with biodiversity than with climate change. There's some clear link that you can draw on supply chain risk for like big corporates. And so really helping them see this as like it should be part of your decision making when you make key operational decisions. It shouldn't only include like finances and people, but also like emissions and also like biodiversity, nature ecosystem risk, and get a more holistic view on your impact. And so this is kind of like where the change, and from a personal standpoint, how I started evolving my thinking a little bit. Did a lot of work in that context with the Environmental Defense Fund on helping them think about how to communicate their methane mitigation strategies and opportunities with generally the energy industry. And then I started to do a little bit more work into how to actually build like really strong carbon intelligence capabilities within those corporates, and how you can start really making it like a viable business proposition. And so starting to do more and more like sustainability work, and then grew a little bit frustrated in the last few years that the more my peers and clients were coming to terms with the climate emergencies and some of the carbon topics, the more they were looking at it with blinders on and silos. And I feel like we had a point in history where we are bound to repeat the mistakes of the past and play a bit like whack-a-mole if we don't provide public and private sector the tools to be a little bit smarter and more holistic about understanding and valuing our impact on nature. And so I left this career behind me and started Mosaic Earth at the beginning of last year, with that goal to try to bring better intelligence around our impact on natural ecosystem biodiversity.
So how would you explain Mosaic Earth to someone who's never heard of the company? What are you here for? What's the purpose? What will success look like?
Ooh, big question. So what we do is we empower ecologists to crowdsource and remotely analyze nature data, so that they can do survey work and analysis that they used to do over days or weeks in just a fraction of the time. And we believe that ecologists are fast becoming one of the most important and crucial profession probably in the world. When you think about it, I think like all global economy largely depend on ecosystem services that are provided by nature. And the people that understand it best are ecologists. Unfortunately, like there is not that many ecologists today.
No, they're hard to find.
They're very hard to find. And so what we're doing is like we're giving them superpowers so that they can do more and they can apply their expertise and really critical knowledge at scale to help support businesses like yours at oxygen conservations and the overall natural capital markets, but also like emerging regulations that we're seeing in the UK and in Europe. And one of the key aspects of it as well is the crowdsourcing piece. Because then to access and collect that data, by decoupling the data collection from the data interpretation done by the ecologist, we are also empowering people like you and I, field staff, farmers. Ultimately, like the vision is for the entire civil society to participate in collecting that data, and give them a chance to really become custodians of what we consider is our most valuable assets, which is nature.
I love it. I wrote a piece a few months ago now about how it's not a million miles away from wearables, be it the Apple Watch, turning us all into active, walking, living data centers. You know, you could see a scenario where we're passively recording and capturing air quality, temperature, sun levels, UV, all these things, just actively walking about the environment. Might we get there one day, do you think?
Yeah, I think like the statement vision for Mosaic Earth is to empower 1 billion people to become custodians of nature. And when you think of like, and this is like where we started it, is one of the critical gaps that we have today in the natural capital space is a data accessibility gap, and particularly a ground level data gap. And there's a lot of incredible innovations happening in that space. Obviously, a lot of investment has gone in the last 10, 15 years into remote sensing technologies. But unfortunately, when you want to understand what happens below the canopy, like at biodiversity level, there is some technical limitations. And then we've got great innovation in the environmental DNA space and bioacoustic in situ sensors that we positioned. But again, like from scalability, like at the space that we need those information system to scale, it's still not, we think, like the silver bullet. And so from a Mosaic standpoint, we looked at this and like, okay, Google and other companies have done an excellent job, like crowdsourcing a lot of like images in urban environment to build their Google Maps and Street View imageries. Can we actually tap into what is today the most ubiquitous sensor network on Earth, people with their smartphone, and turn it into a nature sensing network? And you've got billions of smartphones in circulation. We strongly believe that there's an appetite globally for people to participate and do more. It's just about fine-tuning the incentive mechanism that will vary depending on the regions and the context, but give an opportunity for people to, instead of like taking selfies, maybe like also like turning it and using their smartphone as a sensor for nature. And those old devices are like increasingly packed with amazing technologies, and it's just about like using them in the right way.
What are the capabilities sat on a smartphone that people don't realize it could do for them in that sense?
Loads. It's been like really interesting actually, like just a little bit of like creativity we've been able to develop. I'll give you like just one example, but like little camera guide that are helping people take specific images of the world around them. And one of the very important part of the way we're developing Mosaic is we want that data to be primary trustworthy data. And that can be used for supporting nature claims or reporting like nature impact, like under certain regulations, but also like reporting or like generating like nature credits, like all kinds of things. But if you can't trust the data, like it's basically useless. And so it's super important that on the data collection side, we design it in a slightly cynical way to remove all subjective bias, or as much as possible. So it's all about like using the technologies on the phone to just guide people to complete a certain task a certain way. And we'll then do the interpretation and get the outcome that we need, but it's not what you're rewarded for. And so we've got this camera guide that is linked to your phone compass. And so we can basically like tell you in which direction to point your phone. And then it's also linked to your inclination sensors. And so we can basically tell you to point up or to point down. And so just with two little like slightly gamified like use of like internal sensors of the phone, plus obviously like your geolocation, timestamp and everything, we're able to get people in the right place at the right time, pointing in the right direction, in the right set of sequence and collecting that data. And then we process that data in a way that makes sense for an ecologist to do a habitat walkthrough and do like a habitat condition assessment for biodiversity net gain, for example, in the UK in half a day from the office, as opposed to traveling to site and having to do everything like in person. And we're also like starting to use some of the evolution in computer vision techniques. So we can start picking out from those digital representation of sites and habitats information that are useful for reporting, for understanding how ecosystems are evolving over time.
I love it. I adore it. It's so exciting. It's not just what does one tool or technology that a phone has offer, it's what are the interrelationships and the connecting the two bits together. Then you open up a world of possibilities beyond just single tools by themselves.
Yeah, and the layers that is really important to me, and I think to the company as well, is I strongly believe that if you want to solve for the interface of nature and human society, you need to solve for them together. And a lot of the technologies available today are still considering people as an externality to manage. And the way we're trying to approach it is actually, if we engage people into the monitoring process, their perception of natural ecosystems will change inherently. They will see them as something that they are here to care for, not as something that is a source of food or productivity for like different ways that we value nature like more dead than alive. And so that's really important to us, to have like that, enabling that behavioral change by actually getting people to participate in monitoring activities.
So I've often said, I never mind what someone's passion about the environment is. I'm just really glad they're passionate about it. So if they like climbing, if they like fell running, if they like kayaking or paddleboarding or even fishing, Dan, if they like any of those things, what you have there is a custodian of a landscape. None of those people go out into the environment and make it worse. They all collect litter, they protect it, whether they shut gates, they're respectful of it. You have the potential and the power to do that at an incredible scale.
Yeah, no, and I was quite like, I don't know if it's entirely true, but I was told like a few weeks ago that the application that has had the most impact on people's health in the last 10 years, do you know what it is? It's Pokemon Go.
Oh, yeah, makes sense.
Because like you get people to spend time outside, you get people to like do something that they enjoy, and the collateral effect is just like,
my guess was going to be
being
Strava.
That would be like anyone's guess, but actually no, because probably Strava for a niche in the population has had a lot of impact. But I thought like that was really interesting to consider this way. And when you look at the success of Pokemon Go, Strava, iNaturalist, this gives me like confidence that our vision to really like create a network effect of people to participate in some of those monitoring activities like is actually possible.
So my PhD was in, have you ever seen the movie Twister? So my PhD was that for flooded rivers. So in 2003 to 6, I made tiny little GPSs, threw hundreds of them into rivers. They recorded the ones and zeros, and I wrote the code to turn those into patterns of how water moves.
Nice.
So it's like a very early precursor of the remote sensing side of thing. The thing that myself and Chris, our director of natural capital, talk about a lot is we would love that similar approach applied to estimating peatland depth. So I think there's something there that says you must be able to get a kind of, and I think temperature is the key to this, because when you look at an area of land, you don't know if the peatland you've got 10 centimeters or 10 meters deep. But when you're comparing it to the local underlying geology, the temperature of those two are going to behave differently. So if you have a reference point of temperature and you look at a change of rate factor there, I think you must be able to do something around peat depth so you can remotely sense it. Have you heard or come across or seen anything akin to that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
We need to get there, because it's to be able to unlock the state of the landscape in that way would be so incredibly exciting.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I love like when you bring like all of these different like pieces of metadata that are like seemingly like separate into one and draw some of those like, and like illuminate some of those correlations that help like decision making and things
and it's the sort of unknown factors that sit outside the scope of that. One of my favorite is, so I'm a big cricket fan, right? And one of the biggest changes that happened in cricket was when they went to the umpire review system. So there's a video review system now where a fielder and a batting team can say, we think the umpire's made a mistake. Can we look at the VAR type equivalent? And that's completely changed the game, because what used to happen is you used to not be able to get out leg before wicket to left-handed bowlers, because umpires just couldn't calibrate their mind to a left-handed bowler as opposed to a right-hander. As soon as you have the video thing in played, completely transformed the game. And it's funny which aspect of the data you look at, the capture, the way of viewing it, has the most profound effect. And sometimes it can come from nowhere.
Yeah. And we're seeing this actually in some of the projects we're doing at the moment. Maybe a slightly different way, but so I told you about like the crowdsourcing aspect, and then the ecologists that are now able to do like a lot of their work in this remote environment. And what we've seen is now, because you've got the images that are all there that depict the site at a point in time, there is a collaboration aspect that comes to it as well, where an ecologist today in the field on its own,
incredibly lonely,
yep. But also like you're highly dependent on their skill set.
Yeah.
When now
error stacking.
And one of the big problem in the whole ecological survey space is variability amongst ecologists. So if you assess the same site twice.
No, you're right. It's the exact same example. Yeah, because the umpires are totally exactly the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is like, well, actually, I want a second opinion on this site, on this parcel. And in a second, you can bring like another botanist, like tag him or on the site, and they'll give you like maybe a second opinion, and maybe like it increases the confidence level in those assessments. It reduces the risk.
It's even better than the umpire example, because you're not just referring to an umpire, you're referring to the umpire who's the expert on being left-handed on a Thursday in that environment. So you can ask for the best view of that, not just, that's incredibly powerful. One of the things we found challenging, so we've got some amazing ecologists, especially Esme, who works with us, who's amazing and does way beyond ecology, but leads on that for us. Finding an ecologist in a startup environment, they want that team dynamic. And if you're a small business when you're starting, you can't hire 60 ecologists or a team of them. You have to start building. Well, this way helps give them that support network and that development and that expertise. So it's so powerful from a development, a social and a cultural perspective as well.
Yeah, that's where we want to go. It's building. So right now we're doing a lot of point-to-point project support. But as we get more confident into how the platform works on both sides, on the data collection, data interpretation from the ecologist, we can start building more like regional or even continental like pools of ecologists that collaborate together on certain analysis or certain surveys. And then obviously like on the data collection side, building like communities of people that collect some data that might not be like necessarily valuable today for a particular project, but turning data into an asset where you might be a local community member caring about your local park or caring about an ecosystem that you see being degraded. You can start monitoring it. And that data might be monetized or used later down the line by people that needed to better understand how the historical evolution of the area has been. And so yeah, I think there is that aspect of really creating like communities on both sides for support, but also for scalability.
So we talked about the tech side of stuff. How have you found the social aspect of that, and empowering and persuading and freeing up people so that they can make use of the tech side of that? Is that the harder sell or the easier part? Where's the marrying of the two challenges?
It's probably one of the most challenging part of it, and it comes in different ways. I think from an ecology standpoint first, people don't start career ecology to spend their time behind a computer. They generally love to spend time outdoors, and especially like probably people that have been ecologists for a while. This is something they've built a lot of their expertise learning on the job.
And their identity.
And I'll draw a parallel back again to the field operators that I work with back in the energy space. Like, they were incredibly knowledgeable, but all of that knowledge, they were almost like keeping it for themselves. This is what gave them value in the company, or how they perceived it. But there is so much more value if you're able to share and transmit that knowledge to the rest of your peers. And it's difficult to do if it's not digitalized to an extent. And so I think we're seeing like the younger generation of ecologists, like being able to have the support from ecologists that have seen everything and have a way to access that knowledge from in the form of data to make themselves like to increase their own skill sets and to make better decision with lower risk. That is something that we're seeing as like a big change. And more as well, I think the narrative is, at least for me, the demand is growing for these types of capabilities. And unfortunately, it's more important that we give them the ability to really have an impact at scale than continuing to do work the way maybe it used to be done historically. Because if we can't scale this expertise, I think what's going to happen is that more and more will depend on technologies that automate everything, will depend on remote sensing, will send more satellites into orbits to get ever greater precision in monitoring, and the role of the ecologist will be marginalized. And the standard in terms of how we monitor nature will be lowered to cater for those more automated technologies. And we don't believe that's the right path forward. We need to actually empower those experts so that the way we understand natural ecosystems remain scientifically sound with the appropriate scalability so that we can channel more finance into natural capital, into like restoring natural assets, etc., etc.
I think the echoes with the world of sport continue. Like, I think of the sort of things you're doing as what Opta brought to football, and, you know, starting to really capture the detail and allowing better decisions to be made rather than replacing, you know, we spoke about Arsenal and Arteta during the break, but allowing better decisions, informed decisions to be made in support of rather than replacing the decision makers.
Yeah, absolutely. I always love to look at orthodoxies that are built into like existing traditional systems. And I think like data helps break down some of the orthodoxies. Like, I always like remember the story. I don't know if you know Will Chamberlain.
I do.
And so there's like this, it's a pretty well-known story. Like, he had this fantastic year, scored like the first game above 100 points. And one of the reasons he was able to have like this incredible year is because the summer before, he worked with his coach on doing underhanded three. What do you call it?
Shooting, yeah.
Shooting. Which statistically in basketball is much higher chance of success than if you do overhanded. And so he did this for a year and had an amazing, like one of the since like best statistical year in basketball history. And then the year after returned back to doing overhanded because everyone else was still doing this.
Yeah.
And so to this day, statistically, the data says it's the best way to do things underhand, but people won't go there.
Well, we've seen that played out in the last decade in the NBA again. So you ended up with the Golden State Warriors drafting Steph Curry and deciding, no, we're just going to shoot 3-point shots, because people would hit 60% from 2, or they'd hit 50% from 3. So just take the 3.
Yeah.
And they got ridiculed and abused and mocked. And then they won 3 out of 4 championships. So I'm not a basketball guy, but it just shows that there's that absolute value to be found in being counterintuitive, but you do get criticism and attack and abuse as a result of it. One of my favorite sayings is borrowed from the military: the first people through the wall get bloody. If you want to change something, have you had much pushback from traditional ecologists saying, we shouldn't be doing it this way, and that sort of challenge?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there is like the traditional ecology space is still very close to the academics, to the academic space. And what we've seen is like people are thriving for perfection. But the problem is like now with the need and the demand require us to define what good enough is, because perfect is the enemy of good if we want to scale the systems that we need.
We've done 3 recordings today. Every single recording we've said that phrase.
Oh, really?
Yeah, totally. No, it's because it's right and it's so much.
No, and it's super important. And so, and I think there's an education system, an education that is required, because again, like those experts are ultra important, but we need their help to do much more than we do today. And that will need to redefine a little bit what, like the like lower the bar to an extent. And so there is some change management as required here. And then to go back to your original question is like also on the change management side for us, like is how do we build and activate data collector communities? Because the incentive models that comes with it are can be complex. So right now we're focusing a lot on deploying our approach like in more like B2B context. So people that are collecting data are people that are already working on some of the estates or farms that we're working with that are already incentivized with the scope of the projects that we're doing. But we see a big opportunity then to expand, as like going back to the conversation earlier, to try to, okay, how do we get ecotourists, maybe like visiting Monacat to participate in monitoring activities and maybe learn a thing or two about the estates? How do we turn actually like those estates almost as, or those sites of nature restoration as community assets, where it can create wealth because you can participate in monitoring activity, maybe and be like financially rewarded for helping. It could create health because suddenly you get the communities around to maybe like spend more time outdoors, and also more importantly, like source of knowledge, where people can start reconnecting with the natural environments, relearning how to read nature. When I started on this journey, it was super interesting. Like I spent a few days with a gentleman called Fred Giles, who is part of the Rome network in Somerset, so Citizen Science Network. And he took us out on site. And like grassland with a road like maybe a few hundred meters away. And he was guiding us. He was like walking in front of me, and he stops. He's like, "Can you hear it?" And the only thing I could hear were like the road and the wind. It's like, no, 2 crickets behind me, 1 female, 1 male, of this type. And I was like, the world to him, he was able to read it like a book. And he maybe realized that I'd forgot, I never learned how to read it in the first place. It was a language altogether that I, like, as someone that's lived like most of his life more in urban environment, I didn't know. And I find it so important to maybe like help people like relearn that language.
Do you think we can get to a point where an iPhone or a pair of AirPods is doing the same job?
Yeah.
Is collecting that audio sufficiently that then machine learning and AI can help us process that, and those experts can train the models to do that work?
Yeah. I mean, like, look at what some of those like applications are able to do, like capable of today. Like, I don't know if you're using Seek or again like iNaturalist or PlantNet or Merlin on your phone.
Of course, yeah.
Like, you go outside and you're able to automatically like know the species of birds that are singing around you, or you can interrogate like your app about like this specific plant or flower, or tell you what it is. So there's like, and this is only the beginning. Like, if you think about the progress that have been made in terms of image recognition, computer vision techniques, and then generative AI behind this in the last 18 months, like what will be possible in the next 18 months is really kind of scary, but also super exciting.
Like Moore's law equivalent, right? Yeah. Memory capacity doubles every 2 years or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
how much of an impact is AI and machine learning having in your world?
It's significant, because we are using these and building those models to start interpreting the data that we're collecting. As good as it is today to provide the ecologist and expert and specialist the ability to like create a step change in their impact. When you think about planetary scale, you can't have a human in the loop all the time. We need to find a way to then, over time, change their role from being a direct interpreter or analyst of the data to more of a verifier. And so building those machine learning models and automation models in the background that can process and suck that data coming from all different types of sources and making sense of it, providing the right insight at the right time is super, super critical. Key to unlock scalability.
In a world whereby you're very focused on crowdsourcing, democratization of data and science, how do you then think about IP and data security? Because that's got to be important to you as a business. How do you marry those two worlds?
It's a big question. One that we probably haven't solved for yet.
Do you know what? I love it when people say that, because it's honest and authentic. When people say, "Oh no, we've got that figured out," you sort of think, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" So I love the fact that you're like, "We're not all the way there yet."
No, it's a thorny problem that also will have different answers in different contexts and in different regions. What like philosophically, where I'd like to get to is really considering data as an asset, not as a consumable. And by that I mean, if a data collector, we call them guardians, goes and map a site, for example, that data can be used, can have a primary use, say to do the habitat assessment of monocot. But that data can have secondary use as well for ground truthing, UK-wide remote sensing analysis, and habitat classification efforts. It can have a tertiary use if Google wants to train their own models at a planetary scale and bringing all of that ground truthing data to inform those analysis. And every time that data is used, I'd like to see it, the entire chain being rewarded for it. The data collector can make money out of that data as an asset. The landowner can make money out of the data as an asset. And everyone in the chain continuously is rewarded for that data. And obviously over time, that value of that data decreases, and it incentivizes people to continuously monitor and come back. And not only see it as I'm being rewarded for performing a task, but more I'm building an asset of data that may be monetized in the future.
Love it. If we're sat here again in 12 months' time, what will have changed in your world and what will have changed in the natural capital world?
Oh, hard to predict the future, isn't it?
But that's the fun bit.
So I think for me, in my world, I'd love in 12 months' time to be able to have activated at a larger scale a community in England, in Scotland, of people participating in natural ecosystem monitoring. And I'd love to have a few of the critical environment and ecology consultancies today that are supporting the emergence of those natural capital markets, maybe from a BNG standpoint in England, carbon and biodiversity in Scotland, even CSRD in Europe, to be able to really start changing their ways of working to monitor more sites remotely. So if by that time next year, that has started to really take in shape, in a way that really can be fundamental to how those markets scale down the line, I think we'll be well on our way to have brought all piece to the edifice, to the parent. From a natural capital market, I'd love to see more convergence. I think we're in this fascinating place at the moment where we have seen the collision of three worlds that never really used to talk. You had the traditional conservation world and NGOs. You have the financial world and you have big tech. And they've all come together and we're sitting in the middle trying to get people to communicate and build something together. And what it leads to inherently, in every new market, is a period of divergence, lots of innovation, many different frameworks. What are nature credits? How could we measure biodiversity? What is a unit? And I think naturally it will also start converging. And so having a level of convergence so that efforts on the technology side, on the landowner side, natural capital funds like yourself can start be more focused so that we can scale even more quickly.
Love it. Absolutely agree and could completely support that version of the future. Sylvain, I'm so excited about what you're doing, the steps you're taking forward. When I imagine a natural capital economy, it's not possible without the data collection, management, processing, analysis of companies like yours. So I wish you every success in the future. I'm so delighted we're able to work with you at B&H and hopefully other sites in the future. Thank you for finding the time. It's been a pleasure having you in the shoot room.
No, thank you for giving me an opportunity to tell my story.
Thanks, guys.